No. So it started by embarrassing you. We're now going to talk about, I guess, one of your other, I mean, it's obviously all aligned, but your other great passions is around niching.
Hmm.
And before we go there, we were just having a chat before we started recording about the fact that, of course, the last couple of years have been very strange, uncertain, challenging times. And then right now it feels like we're kind of entering another phase of that. And how that can create for many, particularly in the kind of more like spiritual space, this sense of like, is it okay for me to be marketing right now? Is this tone deaf? Is this
Mm.
icky? And so before we actually went into the conversation that we're planning to have around niches, we felt that maybe to sort of touch there first in terms of what you've seen around maybe that sense of like uncertainty. Is it okay for me to be marketing in times like these?
Okay. So sometimes it's good to ask the same questions different ways, because the new version brings more lucidity to it. So here's the question I put to everyone, because it's an understandable question. The last 2 years have been very weird, and it just keeps getting weirder and more tragic as we go. And no matter what side of the COVID fence you're sitting on, uh, it's hard not to see the consequences that the lockdowns have had. I mean, I think particularly of communities that are already marginalized, single mothers. I mean, dear God, your life was hard enough before, and now you've got this, the impact on the mental well-being of so many people, the masks, all the damn masks being littered everywhere, and the on and on. So it's properly reorganized most people's lives. People who are doing in-person work now have to do everything online and are a little cagey about even trying to do in-person work lest lockdowns come again. And then
Mm,
we've got what's happening in Ukraine as of this recording, and who knows what the next, you know, conflict and atrocity will be. Uh, and there's all sorts of other atrocities that don't get the press, that affect other people's lives, even if it's not shown on CNN. And I think there is this general feeling of things unraveling at an increasing pace. So in the face of all of this and everything else that I didn't mention that I probably should have, yeah, how can we market into that? And as you said, doesn't it seem tone deaf? Doesn't it seem, I don't know, maybe selfish or missing the mark, not of service to the times? So let's rephrase the question. Is it okay for you to have a place to live and food to eat during a time like this? When the world's in crisis, when your community's in crisis, when all of the whole social order is being ripped right down the middle, in the middle of all of this, is it okay for you to eat and have food? When other people don't have food to eat, is it okay for you to eat? When other people don't have a place to live, is it okay for you to have a place to live? I mean, these are not simple questions. I'm not asking them as if there's a simple answer.
mm,
But um, let's just assume that it's okay to have some food and to have a warm place to live, and that us having that, at least to a certain extent, I don't know if you live in a mansion and you waste a lot of food, maybe that's a different thing, but at the basic level, this, we shouldn't be trying to lower the bar. We should be trying to raise, the standard of living of everyone up to people's needs are met.
mm.
And that's a whole immense conversation about what does this mean, what are our needs. But I'm talking about a fairly modest level. Yeah, it's okay. Now, how how much money is it? Well, it probably depends per, per family. Do you have a family? Are you on your own? There's all this conversation about a minimum wage, and there should probably be one about a maximum wage at some point. But so if it's okay to eat and have food and maybe do a few fun things, in this modern society, that takes money. And that money, for those listening, most is going to come from your business. And the money for your business is going to be generated by marketing. So, if it's okay to eat, if it's okay to have a place to live, if it's okay to have your needs met, that's going to happen through marketing. So then there's just a question of, are you okay with marketing as a thing and as a vehicle to meet your needs, since it's not going to be, if we lived in a village and there were hunters and people growing the food, and crafters making things for us, and it happened on a gift economy. And wouldn't that be wonderful? I think a lot of us probably crave that kind of life, and it's just not here in the moment. Some people opt out, but there's that. So that's just number one. Number two, when we're talking about point of view marketing, to me, the genius of point of view marketing, not that I feel like I probably coined the phrase, but it's not something that people weren't doing before I named it. So
I think named it, and I would also say, and I know that you absolutely do credit the people that you've sort of influenced and taken piece of, but I do feel that there's something you've done very powerfully in terms of creating a kind of framework and a sort of journey through that.
Sure.
I think I can't let you just say you've named it, Tad, quite honestly. It's just a bit too humble.
Well, I'll just say that the genius, when I see people market in that way, the genius in it is that people see themselves in it.
Yes.
If somebody lays out a map, the genius of any, you go to a mall and there's always that dot. You are here. So you know where you are. You can locate yourself in the map. And so point of view marketing, when it's done really well, people can see themselves in it, where they are, where they're not, what they've got handled, what they don't have handled. And that's a real blessing, because I suppose the opposite of point of view marketing is gaslighting. And gaslighting is where the thing you're being told is different from what you're seeing. It's another way to say it is, it's, in the Bible, they talk about thou shalt not bear false witness. And because bearing false witness has immense consequences, one of them is to the psyches of everybody who's on the receiving end of it, because you have to now decide what to trust. Do you trust your senses, or do you trust what you're being told? George Orwell had a lot to say about this in 1984, but it was basically people were instructed not to trust their senses. They were instructed to trust what Big Brother told them. And Stephen Jenkinson, who I've had the privilege of studying with, he wrote a book called Die Wise, and he did a lot of work in the death trade. And one of the questions he would get from people, let's say the people's parents were dying, and they say, should I bring the kid in, the grandkid basically, to see this? And he would say, well, why wouldn't you? Well, because it might be traumatizing to see their grandfather dying. And he said, it's not that it's traumatizing, it's just different. They see the change. The traumatizing part is for them to be sitting there at the deathbed of this old man or old woman who they've known their whole life. Suddenly their eyes so much bigger because their face has shrunk, their hands so much bigger because their arms have shrunk, diminished, gaunt, not present like they have been, and to look around at their family and see no mark of that change, see everyone pretending that it's normal and it's fine and nothing's different. That's traumatizing, because then that 6-year-old has to decide who to trust. So it's a big deal, this bearing of false witness, and I am talking about marketing, and I will get there. I haven't completely lost the thread at all, but there's this word heft. Did we talk about that in our
You did,
conversation?
yes. I remember, because you were talking about
Yeah,
the meaning of it, which, uh,
right.
yeah, I'm not going
So
to try
people,
and remember exactly, but yeah,
no,
you did.
so folks can go back and watch that interview to hear it. But basically, it's important that our marketing has some heft to it. But that heft comes from an accurate rendering of what's happening on the territory at the time. And if people can't see the times and the places they're in reflected in your marketing, it feels less and less relevant.
Mm,
They don't see themselves in it. It's a very strange thing to go on Instagram. And I don't understand the geopolitics of the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, and the only thing I know is that I don't trust what CNN tells us about just about anything. And that's number one. And number two is that innocent people are the ones to suffer. There's the old Tommy Sands song, There Were Roses, about the conflict in Northern Ireland, but the last line of it is, um, and those who give the orders are not the ones to die. It's Bell and O'Malley and the likes of you and I. So that's all I know. But to have this conflict happening, this this war, incursion, invasion, whatever you want to call it, and then it's all over the news, and then you go to Instagram, and people are just doing their marketing as if nothing's changed. There's nothing on the Instagram feed that acknowledges what's happening in the world. And when you see that as a pattern, it's clearly it's set on an auto, cue, and it just goes
mhm,
out at these times, and they scheduled it months ago. There's something maybe untrustworthy about it. Not that people have to be speaking to the events, but if what's being talked about in the marketing doesn't in some ways relate to what's happening in the world of the people
mm,
involved, it's hard to find oneself in it. It's like you go to the mall, but there's a map of Texas there instead of the mall,
mm,
and you're looking for some direction in it. You're looking for, where am I? Can this map help me? And it doesn't. So, you know, this idea that wisdom is generic and transportable and the same from place to place, and what's true here is true there, and what was true at this time is going to be true at that time, bears some real scrutiny. For example, um, there are certain, I don't know, seminars, workshops in the personal growth space, certain philosophies that say you've created everything, you've attracted everything in your life, you're 100% responsible for your life. Then there's the activist scene, and the sociology that says no, 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 you're not really responsible for anything. It's actually a much bigger story that you're on the receiving end of most of it. Who knows if we even have free will? It may all be determined. And there's systemic oppression and all that. So those seem to be saying completely the opposite thing. This question of responsibility: are we responsible or aren't we? And if you bang your head trying to figure out what's true, are we responsible or aren't we, you don't get anywhere except some kind of fundamentalism that's incredibly rigid.
mm,
Because the thing we know is that there are friends of ours who've gone through those workshops that you're responsible for everything, and it made their lives better, and it made their community better. It helped. It's impossible to deny. They cleaned things up with their ex and their parents and their kids, and they started a project in the community that's made a real difference because they went through those workshops. But we also know that people have gone through maybe an anti-racism training, and it brought them immense peace and relief. Just because you're a person of color, there's nothing inherent in that that means you understand the level of oppression that your people have faced. You don't necessarily know the history. I mean, I was in Scotland and I went to oh gosh, what was the castle? There's a castle on the west coast, so big, it's like Versailles, and it was funded entirely from the dispossession of my ancestors. The clearing
Oh,
of the
wow.
highlands funded that. And I'm in the store and I'm talking to this 18-year-old, poor thing. She's working the till, and I asked her, I said, do you have any books on the Highland clearances? Knowing that they won't, almost certainly. But her response was so telling, because her response indicated to me that not only did they not have those books, but she actually had no idea what I was talking about. This is a Scottish girl who knows nothing about the clearances in her own. So, you know, you can be a part of a demographic and not understand the history of it.
Yeah.
And for so many people, they've been gaslit by the culture. And when you go to a, you know, some gathering or workshop where you learn the bigger story and you start to like, wait a minute, maybe this anxiety and depression isn't mine. Maybe it comes from something else. It's so healing. And so how is it possible that both things seem to be true? They're both true because, you know, responsibility isn't a fact to be established. It's a medicine to be dispensed. And that's the job of elders in any community, is to see what medicine when in what doses. And you could be in the same workshop if you're deft and agile enough, and one person gets a, you need to reflect on how this is you and how you created it. Another person gets a, honey, it's not your fault. But they're both, you know, so this, just as an example, that we tend to think the truth is the truth is the truth, and it's just cross-cultural. But even the things like the golden rule, you know, treat others as you'd like to be treated, there's lots of variations on that that people have been happy to do, which is great and beautiful. But it's also, how do you translate that in the moment, in your life, in the times you're living in? That's not always so easy. For example, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That doesn't just mean people always sweet and nice. I've asked people this in workshops. I said, would you rather that people gossip behind your back, but they're nice to your face, or people just give it to you straight? Everybody wants it straight. Then I say, okay, how many of you give it to other people straight? No hands go up. So that's just hilarious. It has nothing to do with point of view marketing, but that's a hilarious realization about being human. But the point is how we translate these things. You know, the people are overwhelmed with content and information and data and bits and bytes. That happened a long time ago. What they're wanting is that to be woven together into some sort of discernible pattern, some tapestry, some fabric, a tartan that is clear, that yarn is not just left tangled on the ground, it's woven into something. And that's our point of view. And so they come to us because there's something in that pattern, something in that design that speaks to them. But there's the wool and there's the weaving, but there's also the wearing of it. And so it has to be translated to their lives individually. But it also has to be translated to the times. You know, one of my dear friends, Lewis Cardinal, who's a Indigenous fellow from where I live, a Cree fellow, and I think he was talking about maybe his uncle, but who'd studied with an elder, a medicine person. And the medicine person sat him down at one point. He said, I've taught you everything I know about the plants, all the different plants and what they heal and what they're good for. And you've learned that all extremely well. I've taught you the songs that go with some of the ceremonies that go with the plants, and you've learned the songs and the ceremonies very well, but there's a kind of ceremony I haven't taught you, which is all the ceremonies you're going to need to create and make up for the times that are coming. Because this idea that there's one set of ceremonies that never change in Indigenous culture is not true. You're in a different time, and that ceremony may not fit, and you're going to have to adapt it, maybe make whole new ones up. So everything has to be adapted to where
Yeah.
we are. And that's the point of view. And so that has to show up in our marketing. If your marketing hasn't changed in the last 2 years, it's missing the mark. It's not as relevant. People are noticing, because then,
Mm,
of course, it does seem like a cash grab. Just like, wow, these people don't give a shit about anything that's happening in the
mm,
world. All they seem to care about is money, because that's all they talk about. And if you can't find how your work is relevant, and it probably is if you dig to what's happening in the world, and you can't build that bridge between your own point of view, your own hard-won wisdom, and what's happening in the world, yeah, it doesn't come across well, and you're missing the opportunity. Because for most people, this happened. This was a year or so ago. Of course, the Black Lives Matter thing was ascendant, properly so, and finally, the grief of the Black community was being heard, and it had its way with the people in my membership or mentorship program, as it should. A lot of them were undone, but of course, it lifted up questions: should I even be coaching as a white woman? Should maybe I should have more Black clients, or maybe I should be referring them to Black coaches, or maybe I should be teaching anti-racism. But then, of course, on all of those, there's the other side of it of, wait a minute, oh God, that's tokenization just to get Black clients. And and maybe a Black person wants to work with me. Maybe there's a reason. And so should I turn them away? And who am I to take their agency away? And, people's brains, and I was getting these messages from my members, their brains were seizing up.
mm,
And I said, look, yeah, this is a particular moment. And so it's good to honor the moment for what it is. This is what's happening right now. And this is an issue that matters to me. I wrote a whole series of letters called Dear White Men, speaking to white men about how do we talk about these conversations of race on racism on Facebook in particular. I started a blog called Healing from Whiteness. I started a Facebook group of the same name, which is somebody else's. Anyways, I've thought a lot about it, and I probably still don't know very much, but it's been important to me. And so I said, look, this matters to me as an issue. And there are so many issues in the world. We can't take them all on. That's the reality. I think it's good to acknowledge what's happening, but there's the extermination of indigenous people and languages. There's the acidification of the oceans. There's the just wholesale destruction of forests around the world. There's abuse and addiction and there's just so many things in the world, and not everything will be our issue to be the one that we speak to, number one. And that's not saying all lives matter in the pejorative way, the dismissive way. But it's also, I invited them, I said, can you look at your work? The understanding of anti-racism, at least my understanding of where it came from, is just saying it's not enough just to say I'm not racist. It's just there are institutions that have come from a history of racism, and they're still around, and they still privilege people, with lighter skin tones and white people. And can we acknowledge that and work against it? And this is, again, that's not just racism. There's in different countries around the world, there's different kinds of prejudice where you get systems built up, and those systems marginalize specific people. So I said, can you look in your work? Is there anything in your work that's about undoing systems that have been around a long time, internally and externally, that marginalize people or the world or parts of ourselves? Because if you're doing that work, you may call it something different, but it's still a part of that bigger movement for justice, whether it's a justice inside ourselves or inside our communities. And in some communities, it's going to be Black people. In other communities, it may be Asian people. In this community, it may be, who knows? And it'll change over time. which is good to stay supple, because you can get locked into this is the oppression. But one of the major skills, of course, of the oppressors, of the elite, has always been, besides divide and conquer, has always been shifting and changing and adapting, co-opting movements that used to be radical and turning them into something mainstream and completely defanged, declawed, neutered. So it's just good to stay supple on it and to look at our work and to try to draw the connections. Say, okay, what is my work at a deepest level really about? And does that relate to what's happening in the world? And if not, that's something to notice and reconsider a bit. But also, and if it does, how? And how can I build the bridge for the people who are attending to my marketing and following me? How can I help them see that this nonviolent communication I'm talking about has something to say about what's happening in Ukraine, that has something to say about racism, that the yoga that I teach has something to say about the way that communities are being torn apart. And if we can speak from that place, from who we are, not who we're not, I can't speak for Black people. Wouldn't be proper for me to do so. I can't speak for, indigenous people beyond the ones I come from. But we can speak from our place, we can speak from the point of view, and we can try to offer it up as something useful, as some sort of medicine for the times that we see. And if we do that, the marketing, even just self-servingly, it just becomes more relevant, it becomes more interesting. People, we're so, the biggest challenge is not that people are just in pain in their personal lives, it's that people don't know why they're in pain. And the challenge with the situation in the world, it's not just that it's crazy, it's that people can't get a grip on the crazy. Like, what is happening? Why is it spinning out? People don't see the source of it. And if you can, in some way, lay down some context for people of like, here's at least a piece of why it's spinning out, at the micro and the macro level. This is something beautiful. And your work may be more at the micro level. But here's the other thing I would say is, I think it's important for all of us to consider also, are there things we can be doing beyond our business for the world? This could be involvement in a nonprofit. It could be starting a charity. It could be doing fundraising for, existing efforts. It could be donating money. So there are real tangible things that we can, and we can also use our social media platforms for these things. You can be raising awareness about the issues that matter to you. And again, there's plenty to pick from. There are so many issues. And if you can help people see how the issue you care about is connected to other issues in the world, that's wonderful too. Anyways, that's what comes to me in response.
I love that.
Question.
It feels, I love the way you've kind of like navigated us back to, I guess, like a deeper truth. I think that particularly when times are uncertain and scary, it can orient us kind of like more externally and kind of away from what's really for us. And I love where you've kind of navigated it as like, not every battle is our battle, not every cause is our cause. But I think the more we're coming from like what is really deeply aligned to us, that likely is going to be the place that we're going to be able to bring the most love, do the most good, speak most from truth that other people can connect to. So yeah, I love that. So we've not really touched yet upon the topic that we planned to talk about, but I think that was so rich and so timely. I'm really glad that we began there. So